Get started. Well, I hope everybody's week is off to a great start. If you had a challenging weekend with some rejected offers like I did, I hope you're jumping back in with a positive attitude and ready to take on a new week. It's really the best we can do is have some hope and turn it out for another week, move forward, move on, help our clients do the same. I was looking through the lists of, or the library of videos that we have so far for the launch program with launch and productivity. I was looking for something that I thought would be a great resource to go back to more than once, something that people could really use that wasn't yet part of our library. And the thing I noticed was that we have one video about showings, but we don't have a lot about how to go about some of those kind of day-to-day activities of an agent. And I thought now is a better time than ever to revisit that. So today we're going to talk about how to do showings like a professional and not just unlock a door and stand there, but how do you set your clients up for success? How do you prepare them? How do you schedule it? How do you make sure everyone's going to show up on time? How do you make sure the right people show up? That you don't have a massive group of folks that you have no control over. You want to really make the most of your time at a showing, especially in this market, because you get one look and then you have to write a killer offer. And setting your clients up for success with their offer starts with how you do showings with them. It starts with how you're preparing them for this market. And so it's really important that you consider how you approach this from before the showing happens, even before it's scheduled, to the time the actual showing occurs, and at the end of the showing. How do you kind of summarize that showing? How do you help them figure out if they're going to write an offer or not? So this is a big part of what you do. It's a thing you spend many hours on, or will at a very soon time period. And there are some similarities in that with how you are showing up for inspections and how you're showing up for walkthroughs. And we'll just touch on those too. But I think showings will give us a lot of insight that will apply to those things as well. So question for you, those of you who have been out on showings, what are some things that you've picked up from other agents or things you've done that you're seeing have a positive impact on your clients or are working well for you? Anything from scheduling it, preparing your clients, what you're doing while you're there. Tell me about the things you think are working on showings for you.
I have a few things.
Okay.
One is always looking at the record before the showing, because sometimes there are things like for certain clients that are deal breakers. So let's not waste everybody's time, or let's not have you fall in love with this house after you see it and then you look at it and realize that it needs $40,000 worth of basement work.
Yes.
So that's one big thing. And then my main takeaway has been doing a lot less talking and a lot more listening than I'm used to doing. Because the way I see things is different than the way that like my buyers see things. I might see something as like, okay, if you ripped this out and put this in, or like painted here, changed out this carpet, and then you find yourself saying those things and they're like, we think we could just move in. So just like waiting for them to give an opinion before you say anything is kind of what I've been doing.
Those are good.
Like wait for them to ask you things and just kind of focus on more so observing their reaction and learning from what they like and don't like, so that you can know for the next place that you look at.
Yeah, those are great, Betsy. That looking at the listing carefully before you go, or even before you schedule it, is so important. And I know that depending on what you're up to, when your client calls or texts you and they want to see a place, or you find a listing for them, it can feel like, oh my gosh, I have to schedule it immediately before somebody else scoops up that window of time in the showing, since we're not overlapping for the most part. I have to figure out if this is even a good fit for them. I have to pull up the listing documents. I have to scan through everything. I have to talk to them about what they like or don't like, if this is really going to work. I have to make sure it fits in my schedule and their schedule, and then get it all put together. And maybe you're driving somewhere or you're on a showing at that moment. So it's a lot to take on. A couple of things that it depends on case by case how you operate and what your clients need. But generally speaking, before you solidify your plans to see a property, like Betsy said, and I saw Grady's comments, read the private remarks. Make sure there's nothing crazy in there that's going to turn your buyers off. And more importantly, and more commonly now, it's going to say when they're reviewing offers, when the seller wants to close, how long they want to reply to offers, that sort of thing, because that's going to inform whether you need to go now or if you could go in a couple days. So that's an important piece. Looking at the documents that are attached, the record or the real estate condition report is an important one. That is going to show any items of concern that the seller has about the property. Now, keep in mind, those are often blank. They are often missing all kinds of things that are potential problems with the house. It's really what the seller's opinion is of what's going on in there. Their agent cannot give them advice on how to fill that out. So it's not the be all end all, but it's worth looking at for sure, especially because when you get to the point of writing an offer, your client's going to want to look at that and has to sign it. You don't want that to be the time that they're learning what's in the record. You should be talking about it before you're writing an offer. So looking over that, checking the other documents from the listing, because there could be other helpful info like updates. If there is a quote for some major repair, maybe paperwork from something that was fixed already, you want to know those things ahead of time and prepare your client for that. Yeah.
A few of the listings that we've seen recently have inspections, like the seller did an inspection a month or two ago. My buyers will not waive an inspection, but I would very much get the impression from that they don't want you to have an inspection, right?
I mean, that really best practice for any listing is to do a pre-listing inspection. I always tell my sellers it's worth doing, because then there's no surprises along the way. Everybody knows in advance and they can fix things. But in this market, yeah, I think
like that's just saying don't even submit an offer if you're not waiving the inspection.
I mean, I talked to the listing agent, and it's always worth a call to find out what's their intention behind that. But I think it's more likely that they're going to get offers that don't have an inspection because that's there. So whether the seller's saying it or not, the market is saying it, right? Like people are doing everything
writing without an inspection, even if there is not an inspection.
Yep. And I would say if you do find a listing that has an inspection in it, don't just send that to your client. That's going to freak them out. Yeah. You need to look over it. So you can say, like, I don't have time right now to look over it, but I'm going to review this inspection report. I want to let you know there is one. That's a good thing. So we know what's going on. I also want to find out if the seller's addressed any issues in that inspection report. So that's a good question to ask the listing agent. And then when you have a chance to look at it, check the summary first. And then when you send it to your client, let them know, look at the summary first. I'm warning you, these reports look terrifying. They always do. There's a million things on them. They always sound scary. Many things that sound really awful are small repairs that are inexpensive, aren't the end of the world, are common in lots of houses. But I want to warn you, it's going to look terrible. Now, knowing what I know about houses, this report is pretty clean. Or here are the couple of things on here that were more significant items of concern. And I've talked to the listing agent, and it sounds like the seller has addressed this one, or the seller's planning to address both, or whatever it is, so that you're not just blindly sending them a report that looks like a house is falling apart, because they're immediately going to count that out. So if it's in there, which is not super common, but if it's there, or if it says that there's one available, find out about that ahead of time, ask for that ahead of time, but really use the listing in MLS to your best advantage, to your client's best advantage. So read it, read the description, read the private remarks. This sounds real basic, you guys, but I can't tell you how many times I have a listing where people send me questions that are in the listing. You want to be annoying to a listing agent and not have your offer accepted because you clearly don't know how to follow directions? Do that. Don't read anything, just send an offer in, like Jay was talking about this morning. So read all of the parts of the listing, check out the documents, share those with your client, or at least have a discussion about those things. And look for the important bits that you know are deal breakers for them. Things like air conditioning, municipal water and sewer, how many car garage, whether it's attached or detached, the size of the bedrooms. Look at those sizes. If you know your clients have a California king and there's no way they're getting rid of their bed for a new house, then make sure the bedroom's big enough. Like, check those things, because I guarantee you, they get the listing, they look at the pictures and the location, they freak out, and that's all they do. I want to see it. I want to see it. We got to go now. Well, can you look at the overhead and see how close it is to an industrial area or next to a big apartment building? These are things to point out to them. Hey, I noticed this. Is that a deal breaker for you? Because it's not worth anybody's time to go rushing over to this property when it's something that's not going to work for them. So definitely worth doing that research ahead of time on those properties to make sure that they're good. Now, if you know that it's going to be a good fit and you haven't discussed everything, but you know it's getting scooped up quickly, schedule your showing, talk to them, go through it. If you need to cancel it in a timely manner. But we also know that those showing times are getting scooped up quickly. So you don't want to make it a frustrating event for your client either. But get it figured out quickly and then adjust as needed. When you're early on in the process and you're having your buyer consultation, that's also a time to let people know, like, when we're going to discuss properties before scheduling a showing, here's how that works. You send me properties, I send you properties. I'm going to look up these details. There's these private remarks I can see that are for agents only. There's documents involved. Here's all the details. This is what an MLS sheet looks like. Here's what you're looking for. Here's what I'm looking for. We're going to work together as a team. So when you want to schedule a showing, I'm going to find out when you're available next. We plan for about a half hour. I'm going to put it into the showing service and we wait for a confirmation from the seller. It's ideal that they have at least a day before notice. So set their expectations. They really don't know how this works. So doing that in advance is going to save you a lot of frustration, and them too. It's just going to get you on the same page about how this works. Anybody else with some things that they've done with showings that has worked well? Or maybe something that didn't, that you changed or want to change? Amy?
Yeah, just a real quick one. I work with Carla Florence, and she taught me to always print out the lot lines, which I don't know how it works in Milwaukee County, but in Waukesha County, you can go on, I forgot the exact link, but it's like waukeshacounty.gov /interactive map. And then you search by address, and then it pops right up, and it's easy to print, and it's very helpful.
That's great. Yeah, especially if you have somebody who is very particular about any specifics, busy road, or the lot lines, how big the lot is, whether it's buildable, any of those things that because you've had that discussion and asked those questions in advance or as you've gone on showings. Be proactive and find that stuff out ahead of time, if at all possible. So using those sorts of resources is great. Anybody else?
So I'm posted on Launch this week that I've been doing like a deep dive into the MLS printouts. And so I discovered last night two interesting things. You can click on a checkbox underneath the print for detail, and it gives you a bunch of choices, but one of the choices you can print out or PDF or email the lead paint disclosure in the wrecker, just like that. Mm-hmm. And then you can also print out something that shows how the lot sits relative to other lots. It actually draws lot lines, and it actually shows where the property is in the middle of the neighborhood. And that you don't even have to print it out. You could just email that to your your client. So that's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
one thing
Um,
that is great. It's a great resource to have. I know MLS can be a little clunky, but there's all kinds of good info in there.
mhm.
One thing that I find helpful, especially if I'm doing like a tour of time. So one of the things I tell my clients when I'm preparing them in our buyer consultation is, okay, so there's going to be those times when a great house pops up and we need to go like today or tomorrow, and we're going to be ready for that. However, it's really insightful if you give yourself a window of time to look at 2 to 4 houses in a row. You get that side-by-side comparison. It becomes very clear what you like and don't like. It's hard to look at one house and be like, I don't know, it's nice. Like, it's very hard to find the house looking at one at a time. It's going to happen, it could happen, but especially at the beginning, to set yourself up to really get clear picture of what you're looking for, having a window of time scheduled is great. So I'll encourage them to say, let's schedule a window of time on Friday or Saturday or Sunday, because that's when most of the showings happen. That's when most of the listings are out there. Let's give ourselves a 2-hour window or so, depending on how far apart the houses are. And then the day before, let's solidify our schedule and plan to see 2 to 4 houses. 5 maximum, or they start to run together, unless you've got somebody from out of town and they need to see as much as possible in a day. I wouldn't push it past 5. So you set up that window, that's when you're doing showings, and then you're talking about listings, you're plugging things in as you go through the week. If you've got delayed listings, you can plug those in. You can schedule your tour to make the most use of your tours, where the houses are located within your tour, so you're not going back and forth and wasting time. And then before you go, you can go into MLS, you can do an address search just for those addresses. You can email your client the tour in order with the link to all of the details. So if you're not printing out pages and handing them to them, that's a great thing to do. It's also a nice thing to do in advance. So they are thoroughly looking through everything before you go. It gives them time to decide if there's anything in there that's a non-negotiable. It gives them something to look at while you're walking through the house. So it's a great way to send over your confirmation of your tour and just say, here's where we're going to be this time, this time, this time. This is the order, here's the addresses, and also here's a link to all the info. So that can be a great time to include those things that Alex was talking about, like the condition report, the addendum S, any other info that could be part of that email. So it's great. And you can set it up to let you know when they open it, so you know that they opened it. So that's a really good resource to have. Now, you could choose to print out forms as well. My team agent, Elizabeth, does that. It's part of her process in preparing for her showings for the next day. She'll print everything out. She's looking over everything. She's checking in with the listing agent with any questions, getting clarification, making sure she has all the details of the lockbox, where it is, the code, is there an alarm, all those sorts of things. She's ready ahead of time and knows what to expect. So that cuts down on awkward time, on fiddling around with things, on finding out at the door of the house that you don't have a code for the lockbox and having to call the agent. It's doing your due diligence in advance. She likes to print them out. I don't print them out. I send a link to my clients and I have the digital version up on my phone. So do what works for you, but preparing in advance is the key. Preparation. So set your client's expectations of how this all works when you do your buyer consult, and then remind them when you're setting up those first showings, especially use those resources of MLS to get your clients set up for success, help them to know what's going on with the house, and to make sure that that's worth a look, right? Because you're running around, you're going on tons of showings, you're writing tons of offers. It has to be worth everybody's time. You don't want to burn them out or yourself. So doing those things in advance is a really good idea. The other thing sounds real simple, but giving them advance notice of like the very basics of decorum for a showing. So what I'm talking about is who goes to the showing. So showings, especially during COVID, are really reserved for the person who's buying the house, person or people who are buying the house. In many cases, these sellers are either asking for or expecting that it's going to be an agent and maybe 2 adults, and that's it. Now, if they have a childcare concern or like something comes up quickly last minute and they got to go and they can't get a babysitter last minute, talk about that, double check that there's not anything in the notes about it. But I will tell you, it is so hard for people to decide on the spot if they're going to write a very aggressive offer on property, if they are busy watching their kid and hoping they don't mess up anything in the house. They cannot focus. They cannot picture themselves living there. They feel like they're visiting someone's house. They miss all kinds of details. You can't have good, meaningful conversations or ask them questions and get complete answers. You can't point out issues in the house. You just don't have their focus. So setting that up in advance, hey, since childcare is going to be part of this process to give you the best opportunity to get a look at a house, because you get one look, why don't we set that window of time that works for you when you can have someone watching your kids? Okay, so if we're going to do that, then it's you, me. This is not a time to bring the peanut gallery. So this is not mom and dad and my best friend and 4 other people who have opinions about the house. It's unproductive. And also because of COVID, we're trying to limit how many people are in the house at the same time. This is really about you. Now, if you want to talk to your friends and family about the house, if you want me to explain things to them, I'm happy to do so. But the expectation is that this is the people buying the property and their agent. So you're setting them up in advance to not have an awkward conversation at the doorstep of a house while there's 3 kids running around and aunt so-and-so and mom and dad are there. Because everybody's nosy and everybody wants to see houses, but at the end of the day, they need to make the decision for themselves. And if they're an adult who can write an offer on a house, they can go look at a house by themselves. So that's important to set up. Also, silly things like wear shoes that are easy to take off and put back on. You might have to put on shoe covers, but we might not have that option. So wear socks or bring some with you, or bring like another pair of like little slippers or something. Prepare to use the bathroom ahead of time. Using the bathroom in homes that you're showing is uncouth. Don't do it. Unless there's an absolute emergency, there should be no reason that people have to use other people's bathrooms when they're on showings. Also, especially if it's one of those where they're overlapping showings, you don't want to be like rolling out of the bathroom when there's 4 other parties there. Also, you're not watching your clients. So everybody just keep that in mind. Water and snacks. Nobody wants to shop for a home when they're hangry. And I say it jokingly to my clients, but like really, I keep granola bars in my car. Like if you're going to plan a big old tour, put a break in the middle, tell them to bring treats, bring your own. That's a nice thing to do for your clients. But simple little things like that can make a big difference. And then when you get there, on your first showing, I highly recommend, does anybody do a longer showing, that first one that you do with them, plan like a longer window? So it's a really good idea to do that for your first showing. So what I will usually do is I schedule it in showing time. I send them a reminder of what the tour is with that link. The day of, I send them a text message with a video on it. And it just says, hey, I'm looking forward to our first showing. Here's what to expect. We're going to meet outside. Wait for me to get there. My car is this. We're going to talk outside for about 10 minutes before we go in. And I'll give you the lowdown on kind of what the best practices are for us walking through the home, because remember, you're probably going to have to decide if you're going to write an offer or not today. And it just sets those expectations, gives them something to look forward to, kind of keeps things upbeat and exciting, and also helps them to know what to do when they get there. Otherwise, you will have people who will just wander the property. If the door is wide open, they'll just go in. Like, you don't want that happening. So set your clients up for success. And when you get there, give them a little overview of what to expect from that first showing. So as a reminder, here's what's going on with their offer review. They are planning to accept offers for the next 2 days. They want them by 5 o'clock on Sunday. They want to close on June 1st. And we have a little time to breathe, but you're going to have a pretty good idea today if you want to write an offer, because it's Saturday. They're reviewing offers tomorrow. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, while we're there, here's the things I'm going to be looking for. I'm looking for items of concern, right? We have buyer agency. We've already signed buyer agency before our showing, which I highly, highly suggest you do. It is not the time to wait until you're writing an offer, because you've already been in that house with that client. And if you're advocating and giving advice, you better have buyer agency. If anybody's got a camera on you, or somebody has figured out that what you're up to, if you're being secret shopped, you could be in violation of your license. So you better buyer agency if you're working on behalf of your client on those showings. So it's a good way to get them to sign ahead of time too. So we're all on the same page. So while we're in there, as your buyer advocate, I am going to be looking for items of concern. I'm not an inspector, but I know what to look for as red flags. So I'm going to look for those things and I'll point them out. I'm looking for the major pros and cons, and I want you to look for how you're going to live in the house, how it's going to work for you. And if there are things you like or don't like, look at them through the lens of what can we change and what can we not change or cannot change easily, right? If they have a problem with the wallpaper, that can be changed. If they don't like the layout of the house, that cannot be changed easily, unless we're just talking opening up one wall, right? So we have to keep that perspective. We can't change the location. Can we change the color of the outside? Yes. Can we change the landscaping? Yes. Can the basement be finished, even though it's not finished right now? Probably. So helping people with that perspective as well. And then tell them, I'm going to ask you questions and I'd love to hear your feedback. It is most important that I know what you like and don't like, so I can best help you find a great fit. So you're not going to hurt my feelings if you don't love the house. Let's be aware that there might be cameras or microphones. So if there are, we're going to have that discussion outside. Otherwise, keep it positive and, be considerate of the person who is selling the home. But the more info I have, the better. So I'm going to try not to talk too much. I really want to hear from you, and I'm going to be observing you and also keeping an eye on the house. So you as the agent, this is complicated, right? You've got a lot of things you have to do in one quick 30, sometimes 15-minute time period. So you got to get the lockbox going. You got to talk to them how they're feeling. So like having that conversation before you're in the house is really important. So if you're scheduling a tour that starts at 2, tell them this is our first showing. So we're going to meet at 1:45 outside the house. We're going to have a little chat about what to expect to just set everyone on the same page. And then we'll go in and have our showing. That way you're not wasting your showing time having a 20-minute conversation in the basement that you could have had outside before you started, because you have a limited time to look at the house. So this is, the overview. We have 30 minutes. We have until this time. I'm going to use the lockbox to go in. We can expect to be sharing overlapping showings, or as far as I know, we are the only party there. Kind of set those expectations. Go in. If there's a sign or there was a request to remove shoes, to wear shoe covers, make sure everybody has their masks on. That's pretty standard across the board right now. Make sure everybody's in good standing. You don't know necessarily if there's cameras. And if you go waltzing into somebody's house and disrespect all their requests for how you should be behaving in their home, then when you go to write an offer, if they figure out it's yours, guess what? Not getting accepted. So keep that in mind as well, being considerate, but also in terms of this competitive market, they're watching you in many cases. So just being thoughtful about that. And then as you're going through, like Betsy said, it's real easy to go through and say, oh, you could take this out, you could do this, you could do that. Well, maybe they like it like it is. So taking the time to listen, to observe how they're responding to the house before you chime in with your decorating ideas or how you think they could better this house. Give them the opportunity to have their thoughts about it, and then ask good questions. If they're like, oh, I don't know, I don't really like this living room. Well, tell me more about that. What is it the size? Is it the natural light? What are you not feeling here? All this kitchen is so beautiful, but it's not quite right. Okay, well, tell me more about that. Is it the color of the walls? Do you feel like you need more counter space? Get people to really think about their priorities and what's most important to them. It's going to cause them to think more about really what's most important. And it's going to help them that by the end of the showing, they feel confident that they love this house or that they don't. So you're helping them get that clarity, because it has to happen fast. And you have to get them to the point where they feel prepared to not just write an offer, but write a killer offer. So that is the goal. going through these properties. Once you've had a chance to look at everything, I would say it's a good opportunity to do a little bit of educating. You don't want to overwhelm them. So don't point out every single thing about this house and give them a speech about it. But, you know, the basement is an important part of the house. It's kind of boring, but there's a lot of expensive, important stuff down there that most people don't know about, especially if they're first-time home buyers. So explaining what a sump crock does, and a sump pump, explaining drain tile, explaining, you know, the importance of checking the electrical panel. What's the service there? Are there cracks in the foundation walls? You know, how old is the water heater? That's usually on the tag. How old does the furnace appear to be, or is there information about that? Also on the outside of the house, the chimney can be an expensive repair. The roof, what do the windows look like? So those sorts of things are moments where you can take the time to educate your clients, to establish yourself as the expert, and to empower them to feel like they know what to look for. Just be careful that you're not saying absolute statements, because you are not an inspector or a foundation expert. So if you say something like, oh, it looks, you know, there is drain tile here, I would say it appears that there has been drain tile work. Here are the clues that tell me this. There is a sump crock here. So it looks like there is tile draining here, and this is how a sump pump works. This would be a good thing for an inspector to look at. Or, you know, this tile looks like maybe it could contain asbestos. We don't know for sure. It's possible it doesn't at all, but it's a good question for an inspector. So you're noting things, but you're not giving absolute statements because you don't know for sure. Same thing with, oh yeah, you could take out this wall. Do you really know that? Because if they buy that house because they can take out that wall and then they can't, guess who they're going to be mad at? So make sure that anything you're saying, you're being very careful about how you're wording it. And also reading how they're responding to that, the house, to you, to the questions you're asking. So you're wearing many hats. You're juggling a lot when you're in a home with someone. And so it's important that you prepare in advance, so you're not having to figure things out on the fly, and you're allowed that time and focus to pay attention to them. That's super important. Now, at the end of a showing, there's a couple of things you could do. You know, make sure you're paying attention to the time that you're wrapping up and heading out. You know, don't forget to check the garage, and then allowing time for that next group to come through and being courteous of their showing time and when yours ended. Having a follow-up conversation outside the house is a good idea. And you could get your folks into a rhythm of saying, like, out of 100%, how much did you like this house? Or on a scale of 1 to 5, how did you like this house? Okay, what were the top 3 things you loved most? What were the top 3 things that you didn't like? What can we change? What can't we change within those things? And to help them sort through what they're processing, because they have to do it so quickly. You're used to doing this all the time. That muscle isn't as strong for them. They just haven't done it regularly. So helping them to process at the end of the showing is important also. If they say, I liked it, and you're guessing like maybe they're writing an offer, or you don't know how to fill out that feedback form because you don't really know what they think of the place, that means you didn't ask enough questions, and it means you didn't have a good wrap up at the end of that showing. So being really aware of their thoughts on a property, where they stand with that house. Do they like it enough to write an offer? And what would an offer look like? I mean, you can have those discussions with them. Do you aggressive offer like this house, or do you at asking price like this house? You know, if you ever go shopping and you're like, I love that shirt because it's on the clearance rack, but I'm not paying full price for that. Okay, well, this is a full price market. So do you full price love that house? And we're talking full price as in market value, 20, 30,000 over asking price, or do you a little bit under asking price like this house? Because this market is for the aggressive offers. So if you don't aggressive offer like this house, it's probably going to lead to disappointment. Is that really what we want to do? So helping talk through that with them is going to save you and them some heartache, some time, that rushing to get an offer together, and then you sit down and you say, okay, what price do you want to offer? And they're like 1,000 over asking. You're like, oh my God, what are we doing? So make sure that you're having those discussions, setting those expectations, talking through those things with them. So that first showing, especially, I would schedule an hour, even if the actual showing time is a half hour, and give yourself a 15 before and a 15 after, and tell them, we're going to do this to help set you up for success and to make sure we're on the same page. This is going to make your search so much better. We don't have to do it every time, but this is kind of what we're going to do. And then, you know, if they need a little time to talk about it, discuss it, think about it, give them a little time, and then plan to follow up. You know, give them a call, tell me more about what you thought, so that you're on the same page. And it's not just like, nope, didn't like that one. Okay, moving on. And you have no idea why. And then you're sending them more of the same house, or you're frustrating them because clearly you haven't figured out what they like and don't like, and we're still not finding a house that's a good fit. So you may be surprised, if you're listening carefully and paying attention, where they're looking might not be where their house even exists. If they want a mid-century ranch and they're looking in East Tosa, it's not going to happen. Those houses don't exist there. So, or very rarely. So really understanding what their priorities are and helping to be the expert to say, I know that what you want is this. If location isn't top priority, this exists over here. Would that be okay with you? Could we explore that area, or just do a little tour there to get a feel for it? That's where your value comes in. That's where you're not equivalent to a computer search, right? You know the market, you know what's out there, and you can help guide them to what's going to be the best fit. So that's huge as well. That follow-up and preparation is what's going to make that showing way more than you just unlocking a door, right? That's really our job. I definitely have seen agents who've gone on showings, who unlock the door, who step aside, they just let people walk around by themselves, and then they close the door and they leave. And what is the value in that, right? Even though they're not paying your commission as a buyer's agent, they still want to make sure you're working for them, right? You're still earning your commission and you're earning their referrals later. So do the work in advance, follow up after, take the time, really listen. These things are so important and will help you save time and frustration as well. You're working together as a team. You may as well have the goal in mind and do everything you can to make that happen smoothly, easily, and without any question or surprises. So being proactive is huge. So that's really the basics of going through showings. There may be times you have to remind people of things, or kind of reiterate those main points. If anything came up on the first showing and you're like, oh, that wasn't so good. So next time I'm gonna remind you, hey, you know, let's make sure we're allowing time if you need a moment to like use the restroom and grab a snack before you head out for showings after work today. Let's schedule it accordingly, that sort of thing. Now, when it comes to inspections, how many people have been on at least one inspection so far? Just a couple people? A few people? Okay. So for inspections, there are a couple of different approaches. In any form, I think the best thing to do is to be there. Caitlin on our own inspection. I was her agent. Nice. The best thing to do on an inspection is to be there, at least for part of the time. When you're new, go to the whole dang thing. You will learn so much. I've been on hundreds of inspections and I still learn new things every time. So when it gets to the point where you have so much going on and so much business that it's very hard to schedule a full inspection in the middle of your day, you may want to figure out something where you're there for the last hour, but at least be there for some portion of it, and ideally the whole thing. That is the most time you have with your clients, and it's the most time they have in the house and you have in the house. So it's a good thing to set them up for, to say, hey, it's going to be about 2.5 hours. And you can kind of estimate that based on the size of the house and the inspector. You can even ask them if it's somebody you haven't worked with before, or you haven't been on many inspections. You know, this is what they're going to look for. They're doing an overview of the house. Let's remind you what's in the offer for what an inspection is. If they find anything crazy, they're going to recommend an expert. It doesn't mean we're going to bring in experts for everything, but we might find that it would be a good idea to. yes, I highly recommend clients go to the inspection. It doesn't always happen. If you've got really experienced buyers, investors, people out of town, they might not attend, but I highly recommend they do, because this is not only an inspector looking for problems, they're also there to explain how the house works. So, hey, here's where your air filter is for your furnace. You should change this out every so often. Here's how you take it out. You know, hey, this is what grading is. You should update the grading around the house. Here's why. Those sorts of things. It is way better for people to see it with their own eyes and hear it from the expert. One thing to be really careful about that, so Joan Reed has been on the arbitration committee for a number of times, and one of the biggest problems that she comes across, well, and also just from a errors and omissions standpoint, really, is that people who are interpreting the words of an inspector can get themselves in trouble. So interpreting what an inspector said, instead of just letting them say it to your client directly, or putting it in the report and sharing that with the listing agent, that can get really sticky. So be really careful about, if you don't have a client there, that they're calling the inspector to get a follow-up, they're looking at the report, and you're kind of giving your expertise and how you would move forward within the transaction, but not interpreting what the inspector said. Oh, he said it wasn't a big deal, so we don't have to worry about that. I would be really careful with that. So ideally, the buyer's there, you're there, the inspector's there, and typically the seller is not, and their agent is not, usually. So setting that expectation for them, letting them know this is the longest time you're in the house. So this is the time to take measurements, double check where outlets are, kind of get a reminder of rooms and closets and all that stuff. This is the time to do that. So they don't have to follow the inspector around every moment, but it's a good idea to make sure that everybody's there and focused and not on their phones during the summary at the end. As you want to make sure that they heard about the major things, that they saw the major things, that they got the word from the inspector about the major things, and that there aren't any surprises on the report of any significant weight. So they really should have heard it or seen it. And usually that's delivered in a more palatable way in person than it is on the report. I would also say be mindful that this is the inspector's time and that they're the expert. So you're there as an observer, but the inspector works for your client. So you're there to give your client the bits and pieces of how the real estate side of things work, and to help them remember like which things they had questions about for the inspector, but it's really the inspector's show. So this is not the time for you to give a full report on what anything about the house is. You've got the inspector there, they're the expert. So, learning from them is an important piece of this too. Also, remember, you have to negotiate repairs with the listing agent. So this is not the time for you to put on your headphones and get on your computer and sit in the kitchen the whole time and not pop in and check in on the inspector, pop in and check in on your clients. Make sure you know what the issues are and have seen them, because you're going to have to give greater detail to the listing agent. And if you're like, oh yeah, there was this issue with this outlet, yada, yada. And they're like, well, where was that outlet? And you're like, oh, I don't know. I was there, but I wasn't paying attention. I was like in the other room or something. Make sure you got a good idea of what's major points are going on, where they are. So be there, be present. It's important. The other thing that I think is really important at the end of that inspection, you've gotten the summary from the inspector, or maybe you do it at the beginning, is to say, here's what we're going to do after this happens. So we get the report by tomorrow at the latest. You're going to send me a copy. Before we leave today, let's set a window of time for tomorrow when we're going to talk about the report. And before we talk, we will both plan to review the report. That way you don't lose them once the report comes out. So if the inspector says, oh yeah, I'll have it by 11 tomorrow, great. How about at 2, we do a half-hour phone call and we just talk about what's in the report and kind of what you're thinking as far as repairs are concerns. And that way you already have that set in place, because I'll tell you, it's real easy to walk away from the inspection, the report comes out, and suddenly 2 or 3 days have passed and you haven't had a chance to talk about it. And then you're up against the deadline of your contingency. That's irresponsible. Your job is to keep things moving along on schedule. So make sure that you set that time up. Also, if there's something of major concern, that clearly needs an expert to look at it. So things like the foundation is off plumb by an inch or more than an inch. That's a foundation expert thing. You should get more info. If the furnace is in really bad shape and clearly needs an HVAC professional. If the electrical panel has a lot of problems and it really needs to be reviewed, those sorts of things you could bring in an expert for in advance. And when you have the buyer, it's really, the expectation is the buyer is going to do those follow-ups. So before you leave the inspection, if you know those things are of concern, start making calls while you're there. Those folks are busy and your time frame is short. So make sure that you and your client are on the same page. They're calling or you're calling to try to get somebody lined up right away. And then after the inspection, when you do your follow-up call with the listing agent, because that's what professional agents do, is they call when they're done and say, we're all done. The thermostats turn back to the right temperature. Everything's locked and turned off. Here's the basics of what came up in the report. We expect to have it on paper by tomorrow, but we know there's an issue with the furnace and we'd like to bring in an expert. Here's when we can get somebody in. Like, you want to knock somebody's socks off and make them want to work with you again, do that. Just be really great at communicating and following up. And you know those sellers are anxious to hear what happened. So we can just give them the basics. Don't give them a false sense of hope and say, oh, everything was great. No major things, because their expectation is there's going to be no repairs. So be careful about your words, but let them know how it went and also try to set that up in advance if you can. And then at the end, just remind your clients, here's what happens next. We can ask the seller to make repairs. We can ask them for a credit. If it's a credit, let's make sure we know what your loan closing costs are. Good time to talk to your lenders before we get this figured out. We may go back and forth. They could say no. They could say, I'll do some of these things. The seller can't walk away, but they can push you to walk away. And the only thing you can walk away over is major defects. Here's a reminder how these are defined. So these are the sorts of conversations you can have while you're there. Be present, be proactive. And if you've got downtime, like, get to know your client. What do they like? Tell you more about their job, get some fodder for when you're giving them a closing gift and you can do something really thoughtful and personal, or something you can write in a card to them later. Like, this is relationship building business. So take the time. This is a perfect opportunity to do that. Not the whole time. You don't have to be talking about the inspection the entire time. That's kind of a long, draining thing, right? And also just be mindful of the home that you're in. Like, bringing a bunch of food is probably not the best idea if you're going to be messy about it and have stuff everywhere. Sure, have a granola bar with everybody while you're outside or something, like bring it as a treat, as a thoughtful thing, or bring them something to enjoy after. Not a bad idea. Sometimes sellers leave things, but just be considerate. You're in someone else's home. Being there for a longer period of time, sometimes you can forget that, get a little too comfortable. So, but you're setting the tone as the agent. You really are. So people look to you and your behavior to inform how they should be behaving. So I've got a couple questions here. So can you disallow the seller and their agent to attend the inspection, or would that just create unnecessary tension? So they have every right to be there if they want to. I would say you could confirm whether they'll be there or not, and then warn your client and let the inspector know as well. That way everybody's on the same page and then it's not awkward. As a seller, they have a right to be there and to hear the inspection. But ideally they're not. And if you know that that's your client's preference, you can say, they'd really prefer that the seller not be there, or that they're just there at the beginning or something like that. And you can see what you can work out in advance. Does the seller attend the inspection? Not necessarily. Most of the time they don't. Do you have help or resources for inspection newbies that goes over everything super basically, so that you're more prepared? Janina has had at least one class in productivity that reviews inspections with an inspector. So that's worth doing. I also know Milwaukee Home Site, Dave over there does free classes all the time. So if you go to their website, you could get hooked up with emails for his classes that talk about different things in a home and how inspections work, and they're geared towards agents. So his wife is an agent, so he has some perspective on what we do, and he can be a great resource. Or if you know of another great inspector, set up some time to talk to them, ask them, to send you a copy of a report so you can look at it in advance. You want to really prepare your clients for what a report looks like. Give them a copy of a report in advance and talk about it while you're there. Those sorts of things, setting expectations is huge. People get upset when they're caught off guard, when they're surprised, when there's something that happens that they did not expect. So whatever you can do to mitigate that is an important piece of your job, because it will help you avoid drama. It'll generally help you avoid people having those freak out moments, cold feet with a house come inspection time. So just helping them to understand what to expect from that part of the process and being there for them is a major part of what you're doing. So that bulletproofing the transaction thing is really important, especially now. People feel like they're overpaying, even if they're not, where they've been so aggressive with an offer and then they get nervous about it. This is the time to sort of help them stay even keel, keep perspective, feel like they're in control, understand what we can control, and know what to expect next. So that's a really important part of your job, and being there for the inspection is part of that. So that brings us to final walkthrough. Yay! So if you've gotten through everything, you're at final walkthrough. You've got your clear to close, you have your loan commitment, you made it through appraisal and inspection, you have worked your butt off, everybody has done all the things, lots of paperwork and signatures and emails and calling the agent, and now you've gotten to final walkthrough. So ideally, I would say schedule that when you schedule closing. Usually lenders want to schedule closing once they have loan commitment. But if that's going to happen like 2 days beforehand, then try to schedule it at least a week in advance. So scheduling your final walkthrough, you can do that in showing time most of the time, but you might have to do it through the agent. I would say it's a really easy reason to give them a call and just kind of have a last little conversation, another moment to sort of touch base with each other, thank each other for being great to work with, those sorts of things, and just say, hey, the buyers would like to do their final walkthrough on this day and time. The way the offer is written, that should happen within 3 days prior to closing. You could do it the day of closing, but I will tell you, it is way smart to do it at least the day before, if not 2 days before, if at all possible. And it's not always possible. The reason for that is if there's repairs to check, or there's anything left in the house that your buyers don't want, you don't want to be calling the listing agent as you're driving to the closing table to say, oh yeah, there's some paint they still have to get out of there. Or, oh, that repair is broken or it didn't do the job. Like, can they get that fixed real quick, like in the next 30 minutes? Like, that's not going to happen. You're going to have to push closing back. So doing it a couple days ahead is ideal. Helping your buyers understand when that happens. And then, half hour at the very most. This is really not the time to measure the entire house. This is like last minute, double checking, making sure that the house is still in good condition. The repairs that were supposed to be done are made. The seller does not have to be moved out. Ideally they are, but they don't have to be out until closing. So it's your chance to see, have they packed? Are they mostly out? Where do they stand with that? Don't forget to tell your clients that, because their expectation is usually that the house will be empty when you go there. And if you walk in and there's stuff all over the place, they're going to panic, and there's no reason for that. So telling them in advance, they may or may not be moved out. This is what we're expecting. We'll see how it goes. And then if there's stuff they don't want that is not an included item, take a picture of it. And then when you're done, call the listing agent and let them know how the walkthrough went. And then let them know, hey, there's a few things that are still there. We just want to make sure are not there on closing day. Here, I'm sending you pictures. And yes, you could do a follow-up visit the day of closing to make sure that whatever was supposed to be done is done, whatever is supposed to be taken out is taken out. to follow up and just follow through on that, because you'd hate to do all this work and then get your client to the closing table and then they're upset because the thing you said you were going to make sure was out of the house wasn't out, and that's the last impression they have of you. That would be terrible. So make sure you're following through on that stuff, and that you're there for them, and that that's the time to be excited and celebrate. We got through it. You're closing on this day and time. Double check that they have their their cashier's check ready or their wire transfer ready. This is a good last chance to make sure that's lined up and there's no problems. They got their final numbers. You looked over the closing statement. They looked over the closing statement. Prior to that walkthrough is a great opportunity to check in with the agent and make sure that they either want you to leave the lockbox, want you to leave the key, want you to take the key, or maybe even take their lockbox to closing. And if there's a sentry lock, you just get a shackle release from them and you can take it off and bring it to closing for them. So just clarify that if they want you to do that or not. It's a time to check if there are garage openers, keys, other stuff the sellers have left, or if they're planning to, so that your buyers know what to expect. Are we getting one key? Is there going to be a drawer full of them? Are we leaving these things here until closing? So just making sure that that's all understood in advance, so you're not scrambling the day of closing to have to go get the key again or whatever it may be. So, or sometimes the key in the lockbox is the only one the sellers have now, and they still have to get stuff out of the house and you took the key. So just be really good about communicating about that with the listing agent also. And then, yeah, it's just a quick walkthrough. Really shouldn't be more than 30 minutes. Depending on the size of the house. And again, this is your buyer and you walking through. This isn't the time for the family to get a preview. They're going to buy the house in 2 days anyway. And then they can go in there all they want. So it's just a good chance to sort of regroup, remind them how closing is going to go, remind them you're going to be there, be excited, celebrate, get a last look, and then follow up with the agent after, just to make sure you're on the same page about everything. So it's a nice way to kind of bundle everything up at the end and not have those last minute issues on closing day. So hopefully this was helpful info. There's a ton of information, but I think it's a good resource to come back to. At the end of the day, if you are in another person's home, just consideration is really the bottom line. And if you're working with your client, whatever you can do to help them know what to expect, really take it down to the very basics. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk through the house. We're going to do the inside first, on the outside. Really make it that simple, because they're not sure what to expect at the beginning. And you're their guide. They're looking to you. So don't overcomplicate it and don't gloss over the important stuff. Just keep it really simple. Think about yourself in their shoes and pay attention to how they're responding. It really comes down to that. You're their advocate. So you should understand what they need and want. That's what you're there for. It's not what you need and want, or you're needing to prove yourself. It's really serving them. So how can you do that? And that's what it comes down to. At the end of the day, oh, should I do this? Should I do that? Well, just think about it. Common sense. Are you serving your client or not? Are you being considerate of the person who lives here or not? Those are the basics. It's really that easy. So if you have questions, we have a whole community that is happy to share information on our Facebook group. You can always follow up with the helpline. If you want to talk more about your process in setting people up for success, that's a good question for accountability with me. So reach out. Texting me is the best way to go. And if you have any ideas for things that you feel are not in these videos, are not in our classes, that you would like to have for reference and live classes, let us know. We're open to your feedback, and we want to make sure we're providing a great library that you can refer back to, and can help more people as they become new agents as well. So hopefully this will serve as one of those good references within our library. Anybody have last thoughts? Are you totally over full with information?
I just have one question.
Yeah.
So regarding showings, if you're showing for another agent, you don't have buyer agency with that client, so then,
Mhm.
are you allowed to say anything about the property?
So that's a good question. So if you are there as a representative of the agent, you are an Keller Williams agent, and that buyer agency agreement is with Keller Williams. So you can, but I would definitely recommend that you take the time to talk to that agent who you're there on behalf of to get a good feel for who these clients are, what they know about what they want and don't want, and how they behave, and those sorts of things in advance, so that you kind of know how to approach them, and also what they would say or not say, or how they'd want you to go through the showing. In a perfect world, you've been on a showing with that agent. Now, of course, with COVID, that's less typical, but to have some idea of how they would approach it and sort of mirror that or keep that in mind, I think is important for consistency for that buyer, and also to ensure that that agent asks you to help again.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else? Check the list here. I think that's about it. Amy, there is a video about open houses with Janine on productivity, so I highly recommend you check that out about open houses. Congrats, that'll be fun. Great. Well, if you have any other thoughts on this, let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next week. I wish you a fantastic snowy day. I don't know, snow or rain, maybe April. What be prepared. Always dress for the weather, right? For showings. But thank you for coming. Thank you for those of you who participated. That's always super helpful. I think very insightful. And I love to see your faces and hear your voices so that I know you. And when we sometime in the near future get to meet in person, I will recognize you from our classes. So thanks again for coming, and have a great week.
Thanks,
Thank
Amanda.
you.